They don't fear who you were, no. That version was easy to control, easy to overlook, easy to keep in the shadows while they shined. But now, something's shifting, they can feel it. Your silence has weight. Your gaze has depth. You no longer seek their approval, and that unsettles them more than rage ever could. You're not louder, but you're stronger, not bitter, but sharper, and they know. They know you're rising into something they never prepared for, something they can't predict. It's not hate they feel, it's fear. Fear of the person you're becoming, because that version of you, that version doesn't ask for permission to exist. You were never the weak one, they just needed you to believe that they never feared your weakness. They built their comfort on it. Your silence wasn't peace to them. It was a green light. Your hesitation, their advantage. They needed you to shrink, to question yourself, to hold your breath in rooms where they spoke freely. Not because you lacked strength, but because they sensed something brewing in you, something they couldn't control. So they wrapped you in doubt, stitched your worth to their opinions, and disguised manipulation as concern. They planted fear like seeds, hoping you'd water them with guilt. And for a time, maybe you did. Maybe you bent, played small, second, guessed your own instincts just to keep peace in rooms that were never safe to begin with. But deep down, even when you were quiet, you knew. You knew the ache in your bones wasn't weakness. It was potential, restrained. A fire, contained. What they called too sensitive was empathy. What they mocked as too much was your depth. What they laughed at was the very power they feared, the fact that you could rise, not with noise but with clarity. Now look at how they flinch when you no longer explain yourself. Look at how they avoid eye contact when your voice doesn't tremble anymore. You were never the weak one. You were the mirror they couldn't face. You were the conscience they buried. And now that you're walking with your head high, no longer asking for space, but taking it, they're scrambling. Because the moment you stopped believing their version of you, their control unraveled, the mask cracked, the spell broke, and suddenly you weren't too much anymore. You were just no longer theirs to define. So don't waste time asking why they didn't treat you better. They knew who you were. They knew your value. That's why they worked so hard to hide it from you. But those days are over. This is the becoming. This is the chapter where you stop handing over your light just to make others feel comfortable in their darkness. They needed you to feel small so they could feel tall. But you were always tall. You just forgot how to stand. And now that you remember, now that you rise, now that your silence has turned into vision and your doubt has sharpened into knowing, they can no longer predict you. They can no longer shape you, and they are afraid. Not of what you did, not of what you said, but of what you've become, of what you're still becoming, and most of all of what you've realized. You were never the weak one. You were the storm they prayed would never come. Growth makes people uncomfortable, especially those who stayed behind. It's a strange thing. How your growth doesn't just change you, it reveals others. The more you rise, the more you notice who looks uneasy when you speak with clarity, who falls silent when you celebrate yourself, who used to cheer for you when you were struggling, but suddenly goes quiet when you begin to shine. Growth exposes what comfort once hid. You see, people don't always hate your success. They hate what it reminds them of. Every step forward you take holds up a mirror to those who refused to move, and some can't stand their own reflection because your healing threatens their excuses. Your focus reminds them of how much they've wasted. Your boundaries, they make them realize just how many times they crossed the line. So they'll say, "You've changed," as if it's a crime. They'll whisper, "You're not the same anymore," forgetting that staying the same was never the point. But let them talk, because the ones who truly see you, the ones who aren't intimidated by your becoming, will never confuse your growth with arrogance. They'll never punish you for evolving. But those who stayed behind, they're clinging to a version of you that served them, the version that tolerated the jokes, the one who over-explained, the one who kept apologizing just to keep the peace. That version was easier for them to digest, predictable, soft, harmless. But this new you, the one that chooses peace over people, pleasing, silence over small talk, discipline over distractions, that version unsettles them, not because you've become someone else, but because you've finally returned to who you were meant to be. And in that return, they see everything they chose not to confront in themselves. It's easier to label you as distant than to admit they've been stagnant. It's more comfortable to call you cold than to accept that you've simply stopped burning yourself out to keep others warm. They don't say it out loud, but your growth makes them question their own stillness. Your vision makes their distractions feel louder, and your refusal to stay small. It's the thunder that reminds them of their own silence. But hear this, you do not owe anyone the version of you that kept them comfortable. You do not need to shrink so others don't have to stretch. Growth isn't betrayal, it's alignment, and the ones meant to walk with you will adjust their stride, not drag you backward. So keep growing, keep evolving. Let your light be too bright for those who chose to live in shadows. You weren't made to stay behind just because others refuse to move forward. And if your becoming makes them uncomfortable, let it. Let it shake the ground beneath them, because you didn't come this far to apologize for rising. You came to become, and no amount of guilt will make you return to a cage you've already outgrown. They mock what they secretly admire. They laughed, didn't they? When you shared your dreams, when you spoke with passion, when you stood out instead of blending in, they laughed. They smirked in rooms you weren't invited to, dismissed your goals as too big, your heart as too soft, your mind as too deep. But here's what they won't say out loud. They didn't mock you because you were foolish. They mocked you because you were fearless. Because even when you stumbled, even when you questioned everything, you kept reaching. You kept hoping, and that terrified them. They couldn't admit they admired your resilience, so they disguised it as ridicule. They couldn't say they envied your courage, so they turned it into a joke. And every time you stood tall despite the noise, they felt a discomfort they couldn't explain, because what they saw in you was everything they buried in themselves. You see, people often attack what they don't understand. But more often, they attack what they do understand, what they once dreamed of being before fear convinced them to settle. So when you spoke with vision, it stirred something in them, something they locked away long ago. And rather than face their own neglect, they tried to crush yours. They thought if they laughed loud enough, maybe you'd stop believing, maybe you'd retreat, but you didn't. You stayed. You kept going. And now, the very people who said you're too much are watching you from a distance, silently wondering how you did it, how you kept your fire when theirs went out, how you held on when they let go. But the truth is, they saw the greatness in you long before you did. That's why they tried to contain it. They mocked you because they couldn't mold you, because your refusal to settle threatened everything they called safety. Your authenticity was too raw, too real. It didn't fit their world of masks and small talk. So they labeled it, distorted it, tried to reduce it into something they could control. But real can't be tamed. And that's what you are, real, still standing, still burning, still becoming, and now the laughter has stopped. Now the jokes echo back with silence, because they're beginning to realize what they lost when they doubted you. And deep down they know, they never truly believed you couldn't. They were just afraid that you would. So the next time they mock you, the next time someone downplays your effort or smirks at your vision, don't take it personally. Take it as a signal, a sign that you're doing something that touches places they refuse to visit in themselves. Because behind every joke thrown your way was a silent confession. I wish I had your courage. They mocked what they secretly admired, but you kept walking, and that's what set you apart. Your silence was never powerless, it was waiting. They mistook your silence for weakness. They thought your quiet meant surrender, that your stillness was submission. They saw you sitting there, saying nothing, reacting less, choosing solitude over noise, and they assumed you had given up. But silence is never the absence of power. sometimes it's where the real storm begins. Because while they spoke over you, while they built their confidence on your hesitation, you were observing, watching everything, remembering every word they thought you'd forget. You weren't weak, you were waiting. Let them believe they had won. Let them laugh, let them talk, let them take center stage while you stood still in the shadows, because all the while, something in you was sharpening. You were gathering your pieces, understanding your pain, mapping your next move. You see, true transformation doesn't announce itself with noise. It comes in the silence, when the world thinks you've stopped, when the doubters turn away, when they lower their guard. That's when the real becoming happens. And now they feel it, the shift. They can't quite name it, but something about you is different. You're still quiet, yes, but the silence has changed. It's not fragile anymore. It's focused. It's intentional. It speaks louder than your words ever did. You've stopped trying to be heard where you were never truly seen. You no longer raise your voice in rooms that only wanted your silence. You've learned that not every battle requires a reaction. Not every insult deserves an answer. Because now you understand, your energy is not for proving, it's for building. And while they were busy watching, you were working. While they dismissed you, you were evolving. You didn't need to scream. You didn't need to beg for recognition. All you had to do was rise quietly, steadily, powerfully, and now your silence is no longer mistaken. It's felt, it carries weight, it commands presence. They can sense it when you walk into a room. You don't need to speak to be heard anymore, because silence like yours comes from someone who has already faced the storm within and survived. Someone who no longer fears being misunderstood. Someone who no longer bends for approval. So let them wonder, let them question who you've become. You owe them no explanations, no justifications. The ones who once saw your silence as a void now realize it was never empty. It was a sanctuary, a place where strength was forged without witnesses, and now that you've emerged from it, there's nothing louder than your presence. Your silence was never powerless. It was waiting, waiting for the right time to rise, waiting for the noise to fade, waiting for you to remember. The quiet ones are often the most dangerous, not because they shout, but because when they finally speak, the world listens. They fear the version of you that doesn't need their approval. They were never afraid of the broken you. The one who questioned every move, who asked for permission just to breathe, who softened yourself to make others comfortable. That version posed no threat. That version was manageable, predictable, easy to keep in place. But the moment you stopped asking for permission, everything changed. You see, people don't fear your strength when it's hidden under doubt. They fear it when you no longer ask them if it's okay to exist. When you start walking into rooms not to be accepted, but because you belong there, that's when the fear begins. It's not hatred, it's not jealousy, it's fear, because you've become untouchable in the one way that truly matters. You don't need their applause to keep moving forward. You've outgrown their approval, and nothing terrifies those who once held power over yourself, worth more than realizing they no longer define your value. They called you too intense when your boundaries grew, too distant when your peace became non-negotiable, too focused when your priorities shifted. But the truth is, they see you now, not just the polished surface, but the fire beneath, the clarity in your eyes, the unwavering posture of someone who no longer flinches at being misunderstood. And they fear it because they can no longer reach you through guilt, silence you with shame, or sway you with shallow praise. The version of you that once waited for their approval is gone. In its place stands someone who knows who they are, even in the absence of validation, especially in the absence of it. And that is where your power lives now. Not in how loudly you prove yourself, but in how little you need to. Not in how many listen, but in how freely you speak your truth regardless. This version of you focused, calm, unapologetic isn't loud or vengeful. It simply doesn't wait anymore. It moves, it builds, it walks away without looking back. And for people who depended on yourself, doubt to feel secure, that's terrifying. Because the moment you detached your worth from their approval, their influence vanished. Their opinions shrank, their games stopped working, and now they watch from a distance, confused, uncomfortable, trying to provoke the old version of you. Because it was easier to live beside someone who needed to be liked than someone who's finally free. But don't shrink, don't soften the truth of who you've become to soothe those who never wanted you whole. You didn't come this far to beg for a seat at their table. You are the table, you are the room. And every step you take without looking over your shoulder reminds them they never had the power, you just hadn't claimed yours. Until now, they don't fear your success, they fear your independence, because once you stop needing them, they lose the version of you they controlled.